Welcome back. Welcome back.
Never enough time. Thank you.
That was 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
Facilitation 10 minutes.
And that's all y'all know about that.
What came up in your conversation? What came up? What did you work on? Who did you share it with?
What's in your heart?
Serena, is it okay if I share? Serena and I were in a breakout together, and I just commented that I really appreciated what she shared in the workshop last week, because I actually kind of used her template as I was thinking about my theory of change. I really liked it, how she had broken it down. So we were both talking about how, like, being like a linear thinker and like not seeing things in tables, but having it like really well planned out. Plagiarism. I'm not taking all the same content. I just really liked how she broke it out. So we talked about that a little bit, but also just that the timeline is that, yeah, I'll cite it for sure. That the timeline for both of us has extended, recognizing that this might take 2 years. It's not something that's going to change in a month or 3 months, right? That probably is something that's somebody else would have solved or we would have already figured out, right? But this is a longer term process. And so both of us kind of realized, okay, both of our things are probably going to take like 2 years or something to drive this meaningful, sustainable change.
Yeah. Agreed. Appreciate that.
Love it.
What else y'all got? I'm gonna keep doing this.
No.
So, Talia here. Gary and I met briefly. I really, really enjoyed talking to Gary. Gary's got some amazing work ahead of him. But not but and I know he will get it done. And just in terms of from what I heard of him, what I heard from him, I know that I would love to have an opportunity to talk to him afterwards as well, and kind of share what it is that I've done. So I think that was something that I wanted to share. And at my end, I just basically spoke about what is it that I've done for kind of self-care, which I call productive procrastination, which is I redid my living room.
Okay. We love that. Let's hear from maybe 2 more people. What did you do? Who did you share it with? Okay, I'm gonna actually ask folks from Entra, because you have some timelines on your work. So Liam and Meg.
Meg, you want to go first, or do you want me to kick us off here?
You go. Yeah.
We actually, we do have some timelines. We had a big meeting yesterday, Meg and I, our head of HR and our employee experience leader, to kind of, for lack of a better terminology, start from the beginning again in a lot of ways of the work that we've been doing, in the context of a lot of these conversations that have come to light through this group and internally off the back of that. So 3 out of the 4 of us are actually in this session. Emily is our HR leader. She's in the previous session in the morning. But yeah, we are kind of strategizing on creating a foundational belonging strategy for Entra and what that means expectations wise, what that means boundaries wise, to in a lot of ways reset, and reset with our groups, reset how we view belonging as it factors into the DEI work that we're all doing. So that's I'll tee Meg off with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say the same thing. We haven't had like a clear inclusion or belonging strategy at our company, and we've been just trying to do things without like a North Star. And so it's nice that we are trying to build out like a sustainable North Star. And I also think, just on my mind, like the idea of resetting is nice, but also in some ways we're not resetting because we're the same employees and everything. So it'll be interested to see how we can like pivot the ship, if that makes sense too. Like how we can make that transition go well. Yeah, so we're in the building phase. We're like currently working on some like a mission and then some like pillars, and then trying to tie in like our company's values to that and give it some real like meat.
Yeah, for additional context for everyone here too, like, thank you, Meg, first of all, but the added part here is that we've had a lot of like one-off issues arise within our groups, and we have no scalable solution to address some of the issues that have come up, whether that's, the wrong word being used in a group setting, or information going to one person that's inappropriate, that type of thing. And we have nothing that we can point to like North Star wise to ground ourselves as DI practitioners in this specific space. So it's in a lot of ways for us to be able to guide our support of these groups.
I love this for you guys. I love this. Okay, so I think in light of those comments, and there's one as well from, I think, Tom, about, is it possible to get everybody on the same page? And we're going to dig into whether or not that's possible. How do we bring people along? So I want to start, as we've started our other sessions, with setting the stage and telling the story. And so, because I'm trying to take therapy very seriously for probably the first time in my life, I'm going to share with you what I've learned about what it takes to be in relationships. And so I think some of you know this, but maybe a lot of you actually don't, that I used to live in Seattle. And in 2014, I left Seattle. I decided I was done living here. I packed my bags, filed for divorce, and 3 weeks later was on a plane and I moved to India. And it was incredibly scary. But here's the thing that I didn't realize what was going to happen, is that after 15 years of being a person of color, I was no longer a person of color. Was no longer a person of color. I had like the home field advantage, and I ended up getting a job building India's first online teacher education program, a bachelor's equivalent. This is me in that first year of living in India. Had a very cute haircut, the cutest haircut that I have never been able to get back ever again. And I had a big flat, I had help, and I lived kind of like this dual existence, right? Like I had the expat experience, and I also spent a lot of time in low income private schools, government schools in India, which is, I mean, such difficult environments to work in. And because I hadn't experienced privilege all through like my adulthood, coming to age in the United States. I didn't actually take the time to think about what it meant to work in the environments where I was supposed to be leading the charge in. And I really rested hard on my experience of having been a public school teacher, uh, having taught in, a teacher education program in grad school. But I think that the truth is, and this is, of course, like I get to reflect in hindsight a little bit, is that I got my job because of my privilege of being fair skinned, of being tall, of like having an American accent, of being foreign educated. And just about everybody that I worked with in my organization came from wealth. They studied in expensive private schools, they went to college or grad school overseas as well. And we were all trying to work in these rural environments, these very, very low income environments. And so a few months after starting this job, I go to the state of Bihar, which is one of the least literate states in India. And we're working with this community-based organization. And you can see, right, that like people are sitting on the ground. And in the very first day of being in this environment, I'm up front. I'm running a pilot and I have a deck, a PowerPoint presentation that my colleague has translated for me in Hindi, which I speak. I'm fluent, but I'm not literate. I can't read and write. And I spent the first half of the day like kind of hacking through it. And at the lunch break, the leader of this organization, this nonprofit organization that we're running a pilot with, which it wasn't a small pilot either, it was like 300 teachers. And he's the guy standing in front of the room. He comes to me and he basically says, like, you can't teach the rest of the session. And this was day one of 4 days that we were going to be here. And he's like, you have to pass it to your colleague. Like, it's so obvious that you don't know how to read Hindi. It's kind of embarrassing. I don't want the takeaway to be that somebody who comes from the US like knows better than the people that we have in the room. So why don't you go sit with the teachers? You can just listen for the rest of the time. And I did that. And I did that. And the day that we were leaving, he says to me, hey, and by the way, we're going to be turning in all of our session evaluations to you in this pilot in Hindi. You're not going to get them in English because you need to practice. You need to practice. And I come home, I buy all of these kids' language books, the ones where like you can follow the dotted line. And I did that. It was really hard. It was really hurt my ego big time. But that pilot early on taught our team some really incredible lessons about how to build a product for that audience. What is the content they need? And we went on to have a pilot in, like 10 other states. Like I think by the end of the year, we had about 1 million users. And that early experience really shifted how we entered into relationships with these organizations. And in this instance, like I spoke Hindi, but we were doing pilots in places where I neither spoke nor read or I didn't have any of the language skills. We had some really incredible successes. We had some like pretty catastrophic failures. This guy in Bihar, like he went on to become like an Ashoka Fellow and an IDEO Fellow, and just like he's had an incredible journey. And I think in part because he understands relationships and he understands his community. And so some of the truths about working with people and in spaces that we're not familiar with, and it doesn't have to be people in the other side of the planet, it can actually be like senior leaders, like we're not familiar with them, we don't know who they are oftentimes, is we have to know who we are and what influence we have in any environment. We have to know who the people are as well and what their issues are, as well as what is their vision for their world. And how we step into the role of activating, supporting, mobilizing, and navigating. In order for equity work to be sustainable and valuable, we have to be in these relationships. We have to be in relationships with community, and we have to understand how we interact with power structures. So that's my case for being in right relationships with people. I'm going to pass it to Piers to walk us through our knowledge ancestors for this session.
I remember my own story, my own case, my situations. I realized that as I'm thinking about it, a lot of the experiences that I've engaged in where people put onto the banner, onto the title, we're doing some equitable social change. Many of them failed because they didn't consider the relationships, right? Because they focused on addressing what they saw as the problem or creating the technology instead of the people that might support them once they're finished, right? So I think it's really critical to focus on this first point of topic, the first topic that we're going to be discussing today in the Knowledge Ancestors section, which is relationality. So I don't know how many people have heard this of this person. Raise your hand or put your hand in the chat, or even nod an affirmation if you are not on the screen, if you've heard of the name Descartes before. Maybe, possibly. Cool, hands, all of that. If you haven't, I think, therefore I am. He made it. It's useful. It's important for the Renaissance and for the construction of how we see knowledge all around the world. And I personally consider it inadequate as a way of looking at the world. I counteracted with a different mindset, a different resource, set all over the African continent, set in a lot of different places and environments, so much that sometimes people consider it trite. If you've heard of the phrase Ubuntu, which is I am because we are, right? Any one of the endeavors that we focus on, how we engage ourselves throughout the world, you've probably seen this theme in all of the other sessions that we've discussed. Support, remain successful, and remain sustained because of how it affects others. The ripples that we put out in the world are supported by this web of community that can hold accountable and sustain together the things that we create. So relationality matters in this work. Because once we build something, if we leave it, will it sustain, and how do we know that's the case? The second topic that we wanted to bring up as very important was trust building and solidarity. One of my fields, one of my skill sets for my PhD is, you might consider it innovation practice, design thinking, participatory design, and on one big topic in understanding people they like talking about is empathy. It is, I can understand walking in some other person's shoes, one other community's shoes, and therefore I can advocate for them on this behalf. I can create this intervention for them. I can see them as consumers and the like. Valuable, important, and we're going to build some empathy building. We're going to talk about some empathy building resources in this course today, and it is still not enough, because there's a further level in equity work and justice work that's about including them in the process, helping you build solidarity for their work, right? So you advocate for them to do it themselves as well, and to sacrifice what you might want to build so that they can be a part of these spaces as well. Trust building and solidarity is working past empathy, not only being an allyship, I will stand with you when things are easy, but about being a co-conspirator, making sure that how you show up in the space does not exclude them, even if you say you're advocating for them, right? So this third topic is actually one of my favorite topics that we're gonna build a few resources for in this course. We call it one of two things, either systems thinking or systems mapping, right? So you might have heard people talking about this in different breakout rooms, different topics. Oh, that's a good systems thinking mindset, mapping, what have you. And for the folks that haven't been exposed to this concept before, it might be a bit confusing as to what it actually is. And a way to get started on this is to think about how if you zoom out to different relationships outside of yourself, what happens to the world? Why does this matter? Everything we've been talking about in this class, whether it's equity, whether it's systemic oppression, whether it's engaging with the system, with the communities around us, they are a relationship of systems. I connect with Aparna connects with all of you, and those zoomed out are a constellation of relationships that most people don't even try to think about how complicated they are, but they're essential for figuring out what's actually happening in a space so that you can create something that isn't affected by the system, but changes it into a healthier one. So we're gonna have some simple starting tactics to start thinking systemically about the relationships that you're building. So the first topic is, goodness, my apologies. The first topic is relationality, how you engage with other folks. The second topic is trust building and solidarity. And the third topic is systems mapping and systems thinking. And you're gonna see that reflected throughout the frameworks and the tools that you're about to learn today. So with that said, Aparna.
All right.
Nice.
Frameworks. All right. This first framework is focused on understanding people and our relationship with them, and really seeing personal power, where personal power and privilege plays with some systemic issues. And so I want to walk you through a framework that I've used a lot over the last 5 years, and I keep coming back to it because I just find it really useful in helping us see how systems of power and privilege and systems of oppression and vulnerability interact in and through our identities. And so this framework is called Agent and Target Rank. It's sometimes also called the Power Identity Audit, developed by a professor named Leticia Nieto, Dr. Leticia Nieto. And it's designed for, I would say, the US context or a high income country context. And it's still very relevant and very applicable in other places. She offers us two ways of thinking about our identity. Agent identities are ones that are socially valued or socially overvalued. These are the identities that we see as being the norm or normal. Agent is shorthand for agent of oppression. And then the target identities are ones that are socially undervalued, marginalized, oppressed, and it's shorthand for target of oppression. What's important to know before we go to the next slide is that our identities operate in a larger systemic context, right? So this isn't so much about I'm okay with people that are people of color, or I'm okay with somebody who's a working class person, right? Like I value them. Okay, great. You can value them. We're still looking at our identities in this larger context. And so in the next slide, you can start to see how this framework shapes up. And some of you who've been with me before, this is not the first time you're looking at it. So Leticia Nieto offers us a couple of categories, and these are the categories that are relevant and shape our experience. So what you will notice is that like our hobbies, for instance, are not there, right? It's those aspects of our identity that either offer us privilege or create challenges for us. And that's happening at the systemic level. And some of these make sense immediately to most of us. When we think about age, for instance, as adults, all of us here, we have age privilege, we have a lot of autonomy. Kids don't have that. And at least in the United States, elders don't have it as well. They also don't have a lot of autonomy. In other places, we take better care of older folks. Disability, right? Our world is designed for able-bodied people. And if you have visible or invisible disabilities, it's usually up to you to figure out how you're going to navigate that environment. Or you might have a temporary disability, right? Which in the United States, being pregnant is defined as a temporary disability. And I don't know about you, but when I'm out with friends who are pregnant or have strollers, I've noticed how they become invisible, and folks will just like bang the door on someone with a stroller, right? Not look at you, not step up, right? Like not step off. Also, like the design of sidewalks in my very lovely neighborhood, we still don't have the ramp off on the sidewalk. So if you're in a wheelchair, you have a stroller, you're just gonna do the bump to get down to the road. Immigration status is another big one. If you're an immigrant or refugee, especially if you're an immigrant or refugee from a low-income country or from the global south, versus having a passport from a high-income country like the US, Canada, Europe. Indigeneity, if you're native really anywhere in the world, you're systematically disadvantaged, even in places like India, where our native populations are really poorly treated. Their land is constantly being stolen versus being non-native. Being non-native is a dominant identity. It's the system values it. I'm curious as you're looking at this, what are categories that you would add that might be relevant to your context that might not be here? What are categories that you would add that are relevant to your context? Megan?
Yeah, I think it's related to the education one, but because I'm somebody who became a lawyer later in life, I can tell that professional status or what your profession or job is definitely feels like a class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, education, having higher education, not having higher education in certain contexts as well. What else would you add? Housing, being stably housed, maybe owning your own home versus not. Maya?
Issues around language, native speakerdom or multilingualism or anything around that, heritage speakers. No.
And how does that show up? Like what with respect to language?
Yeah, so being able to speak like a purported native speaker gives you a lot of privilege. If you are a learner of a second language, things like accent, just how people read you based on your linguistic identity.
Yeah. Lindsay?
I just, on the class on the second line, I just wanted to clarify. So as working on one side and then owning on the other after the comma, are those meant to be connected to each other? And is owning relation to a home? Or I just want to make sure I understand what those two words specifically are referring to, if you wouldn't mind clarifying.
Yeah, so in the target column, it says poor or working class. And in the agent column, it says middle or owning class, owning assets, owning assets, owning
Got it.
land,
Thank
owning
you.
your own home. Yeah. From Aaron, we also have incarceration. Yeah, we hugely systematically disadvantage anybody that's ever been incarcerated. Okay, I have a few more questions for you. I'm going to pop them in the chat, right? So as you're looking at this, think about where your identities fall. Do you have a lot of agent identities? Do you have a lot of target identities? Which of your marginalized or target identities have you sought to hide or not share? Which privileged identity or identities do you leverage? What about the makeup of the organization that you're working in or the context that you're in? Where's the leadership team? Where's everybody else? And what are some of the stories that maybe you've told about people who have some of these vulnerable identities? What are the stories that you've told about the needs that they might have and your responsibility to them? So take a second to think, and I'm going to invite a couple of people to share what's coming up for them. What's coming up for you? You can just come off of mute. Where do your identities fall? Which ones do you hide? Which ones do you leverage?
Good morning.
Hey, Rochelle.
Where do my marginalized identities fall? I am a biracial Black woman. And so, and I identify as a Black woman, but also being biracial has also created different scenarios for me, and different hardships for me. I am I'm LGBTQIA, or as I identify, I personally identify as a woman in comfortable shoes because I just don't like being put in in small little boxes. I have ADHD, which really makes life interesting for me sometimes. Um, uh, and I, I have a college degree, and I am born right here in the United States. So those, I mean, that would be a privilege. But those are the first ones are my marginalized ones. And one of the biggest things that I've really been trying to overcome and has created hardship and that I used to hide is like code switching is a real thing. Changing how I talk, everything from monitoring how I'm dressing. So I'm not like, I didn't want to dress too Black, quote unquote, when I went to work or went to job interviews, to monitoring my facial expressions and how I speak. I speak a lot with my hands, and my face, not just my mouth, but my face is very animated sometimes. And sometimes I really am not responsible for what it does because it has a mind of its own, but I've had to be very conscious of that. and that's probably one of the biggest ways that I've tried to hide, like, or switch up who I am. It's always been really clear that I'm like part of the LGBTQIA community. I've never really hidden that. And the privileges that I lean into is I'm educated, and I am born here in the United States. English is my first language. And I guess it doesn't feel like it, but I'm considered middle class owning. And I and sometimes that gets me through doors, and I let it get me through doors. And I, and to be honest, the privileges I have, I purposely use to my advantage.
Yeah.
And I'm not 60 yet. I'm 50, so I'm like right in that middle age where people think that I'm grown enough and smart and wise, but not feeble, right?
Mhm.
So I lean on that so hard, so hard. Be like, yeah, I'm your elder. Listen to me. Like, and so,
But
yeah,
also, I'm not so old that you can write me off,
right.
right? I'm still
I'm still
relevant.
cool. I'm still cool. I'm still
Thank you for
relevant,
that.
right? So,
Let's hear from maybe one more person. Thank you for that, Rochelle.
I'll share. Thanks, Rochelle. Let's see. The where my identities fall. I'm neurodiverse. I have a disability, and I am queer and trans. So I have a few that fall in that middle column, but most of my identities would fall over to the right in the privileged agent of oppression. I'm white, middle class, homeowner. I'm often read as a man. I am a Christian. I have a college degree. I was US born. I'm non-native. I'd say the identities that I typically seek to hide are my disability and sometimes, depending on context, and if I'm able to, being trans. And the privilege identity that I leverage is being white. Being a white male red person in a DEI space for some reason seems to give me a lot more clout because I get to be, I'm not an angry Black woman, or, I'm a white man talking to other white people. And sadly, that makes people listen to me. And so I use that to my advantage and also hate it. Yeah, and I'd say, the leadership in my organization is very much all on the privileged agent side.
Yeah, they also look alike. They also all wear the same blue button-down shirt.
Right.
It is something. Yeah. I can never see a man in a button-down shirt ever again, like a blue button-down, and not think of Mark's organization.
I'll send you my wedding pictures of my husband and me in our blue button downs, and it'll
reset.
It'll reset.
Yeah, as we're working through today's session, right, and even after, the invitation is to really think about that. What are you hiding? What are you leveraging? And being really present, being really, really present about that. Leticia Nieto, in all of her wisdom, has also left us with a skills model, which is a way to think about when we have identities of privilege or when we have identities that are systematically marginalized, what are some of our default settings and what are kind of behaviors of choice? Okay, what are behaviors of choice? And so she offers us for those aspects of our identity where we have a lot of privilege, our default behaviors, our default setting starts off with indifference. What does it have to do with me? Why do I have to pay attention to it? Maybe I'm not paying attention to it at all. because it doesn't have any impact on my life. If I'm not an immigrant, right, working through my H-1B or whatever naturalization process, never have to know how hard that is, right? Not paying attention to the fact that like the fees have doubled in the last 2 years, right? Doesn't affect me. I don't have to come up with whatever that $1,500 is. Then there's distancing. Distancing sounds like I don't have a problem with those people, or I do have a problem with them. I don't want to engage with them. It might even be like I want to help them, or I want something from them. I want to learn with them, right? I want to process with them. It also looks like, especially I think in the US context, it also looks like, well, I'm not like the folks in Florida. I'm not racist like that, right? Like I live up here in the Pacific Northwest or New York or DC, Chicago. I'm not like those people. And I just have to say that the South begins at the US border. And so everything south of that is essentially the South. And then there is the skill of, in Leticia Niero's model, it says inclusion. I put the word integration there because I think that's a little bit easier for folks. So this skill, right? Like the setting is, I don't see you as other or different, but please leave your otherness at the door and come in. So you're welcome here so long as I don't have to deal with your difference, right? Like in Mark's example, as long as you're presenting cis het, good, you can be here. You can chat with me, but don't let me figure out what your identities are. It makes me uncomfortable. And the thing about these first three being sort of unconscious behaviors is that it takes a lot of work to shift into a state of awareness. We have to be fully present to start to undo the psychologies of bias and put ourselves in places and with people who are going to help us make that shift. So, awareness is the first kind of behavior of choice, awareness of like my own lived experience, and the recognition of my role and advantages. It's inviting you to take responsibility for your own learning and your own growth. How I think a lot of this becomes challenging is if you're in an organization where you're tasked with educating the board of directors, or you're tasked with educating the leadership, and the tension that you feel in that is because stepping into a state of awareness is a lot of that's like our own work, um, and work that we do with people who have like our shared privileged identities. And then there is accompliship, which in the original model is allyship. I don't love using the word allyship because it kind of means nothing, but this skill is the ability to normalize the discomforts of guilt and shame associated with awareness and put them towards social justice. So the ick that I feel, I'm not displacing that onto a person with a marginalized identity and help like forcing them to process with me. I'm like dealing with it and I am taking action. When we are stressed, when there's a lot weighing on us, we tend to slide backwards. We tend to slide backwards into our default settings. Your default settings may not be indifference, distancing, seeking assimilation. They may be something else. Probably good to check in with yourself about like what is my holding pattern, right? Like, and with what identity groups. Similarly, we have a skills model for target oppressed identities as well. And we start with the ones that are kind of like default behaviors, right? survival, which is anything that doesn't help me survive, anything that doesn't help me move through the world with safety, I cut it off. How I wear my hair, how I speak, all kinds of things. In our morning session, we had two Muslim women share that in just the last couple of years, they've taken off their hijab. So they're choosing not to wear their hijab, which is hard and so deeply personal and disempowering for a lot of folks. It's for survival. Then there's confusion. This is the state where like something happens and we ask ourselves, did this happen? Did I get here because of my ex identity? Did I not get promoted because like I'm Aaron and I haven't fixed my face, whatever that means? Right? Like, why is it happening? Is it because I'm queer? Is it because I'm not wealthy? Is it because I'm not college educated? And what we need to go from the state of confusion into a state of empowerment is having time and space with people who have those oppressed identities. This is why we have employee resource groups. This is why we have affinity groups. This is why you like, if you're queer, you probably have a group of queer friends where like straight cis het folks are not invited, right? Because like we're gonna ask a lot of really dumb questions. You don't want that. So how we create spaces for folks, right, becomes important. I think Liam and Meg, this is like a little bit of a tussle for you all as well. Like, how do we create it and everything else? When we have that, when we have those spaces, we feel a sense of empowerment. And that looks like having conversations with people and really saying what you think. This is the state where people of color get fired in their organizations, women, queer folks. Like, this is when you're getting demoted, you're getting fired, you're not able to move your agenda forward, because you're having conversations with anybody and everybody. And we typically learn from that. We typically learn from that and we step into a state of strategy where we're aware of who is going to help us do our work. We can slow down enough to even see what that work is. We've pushed you to do some of that, even with thinking about what your minimum viable action is going to be, right? Like, you don't have to leap into solving hunger, like, you know, in Latin America. Like, what's the next step that you need to take? Slow down. Who is going to help you? Who's going to help you execute on that next step? And then recentering. This is so tremendously difficult to do. The act of recentering is getting to a place where you're so grounded that not only do you value your own vulnerable identities, but you can value that in other people. You can value that in other people. You're not climbing up the ladder and pushing the ladder off. You're bringing them along with you. Okay. There is an amazing video talk of Dr. Leticia Nieto digging into these frameworks, and we'll put it in the chat. And then I think, Rachel, we can also include it in the email that goes out tomorrow. I encourage you to just listen to it. You can put it in your headphones when you're out for a walk. You don't have to watch it as a video, but it's a pretty incredible resource. And she takes it a step further and she helps us see how these identities interact in interpersonal relationships. The thing to know is that the person who's aware of the power play in the room is going to be the most successful, right? So knowing how these dynamics are working in interpersonal spaces is going to help you, I don't know, get your work done at the end of the day. So if you have questions that are coming up for you, go ahead and put them in the chat so we can track them. Take a minute to breathe, reset. Before we move on to the next section, we want you to grab your homework. If you didn't grab your homework, it's okay. Just grab the worksheet. And we also want you to grab just a plain piece of paper or something to write on. And if you write on one of those like tablet thingies, get your tablet thingy. And once you have all of that, just give me a thumbs up so we know that you're ready. Okay. Brilliant. Homework, paper, something to write with. Okay.
Nice. Cool. My turn, right? Let's zoom out, right? I have been using the positionality wheel for longer than I can actually remember. I don't remember when I was introduced to it, but I said, I now need to use. And this entire time that I've introduced it to folks, and I've seen how people have discussed equity concerns on the surface level, it's a valuable resource. And by itself, I realize that people are using it kind of as a cop-out because a lot of people are navel gazing. They're focusing on their privileges, their oppressions, their context, and how that shows up in the world as a space to start arguments with people that either are trying to go deeper or wider or are doing the same thing, right? And in these spaces, these systemic issues, all of those identities are about how the systems we are a part of see you and offer power in ways that other people aren't. It's also important to zoom out, to learn more about not just what you're experiencing, but the relationships around you. More practically, actually, as well, your equity challenge involves others, involves other people. If you did the homework, you probably created a list of as many people as you could think of that are directly influenced by or influence the problem challenge you're focused on, which is why we focus on, at least to some extent, talking about stakeholder mapping. Why would we care about this in the first place? Let's go back to what we were talking about in session 2. We are making things that are supposed to influence the world and influence others that live in it, right? We influence people. Other people outside of that are influenced by our actions, which then influence other people, which then influence other people. You might have heard of the concept, the butterfly effect, right? To represent chaos and disorder that shows up sometimes in our lives. But the truth is, our effects have ripples. Additionally, effects outside of ourselves have ripples on us. And in many ways, most people rarely think about the web of effects that happen inside a particular context. This is a tool to make that visible. So there's some examples that might make sense to help address this issue. Like, for instance, if you're in school, if you're trying to affect a university space and you're trying to access a student board, but you need to get through a teacher, that is second order, third order effects. If you want to activate an employee resource group and the meeting is at the place where they decide to support your work, another example. Or if the defensiveness and immaturity of your political leaders keeps an issue for the working class community stagnant. So you have to address him before you address them, right? The most important thing in this context is to clarify the relationship between stakeholders outside and also involving your relationships. So then you can use it to zoom out and in as you engage with these people. So we're going to start by doing this stakeholder mapping together, right? So as Aparna said, we need you to get a big piece of paper, all right? A resource, here's mine. It's going to be all nasty after this. I hope you all do the same. You can do it on an iPad or another drawing digital resource if you would like. The second step, take the list that you have created. we're just going to start because we're trying to build the capacity and you can do the rest later. I suggest you do so is you write down the names of about 5 to 8 stakeholders that are important to your projects. All right. In a real situation, you write down as many as makes sense. Keep in mind, the more you write down, the more complicated this is going to become, but it serves you at the end, right? Of these, start by picking 2 of them, okay? Any 2. It does not matter which 2 you focus on. We're just going to practice this once and then go forward. Next slide, please. Cool. There's an example. You're going to see me doing it with you. Here's what I want you to do. As I'm telling you the things, do the things. Okay. You don't have to wait for me to do it. We'll give you a little bit of time afterwards, but you should do these as well. Just write 5 to 8. You have 6 there. I have 5 here. Cool. Then the next slide, you should see the next step. You pick 2 of the names. You draw a line between them, an arrow from one side to the other, all right? And in that arrow is a way that person 1 influences person 2. I'm going to say that again. Person 1 influences person 2 using this arrow, all right? So here, Joe employs Beth. We're not trying to make this super complicated. There are many ways that someone can exert power over somebody. Choose the largest, the most prominent one. Here's mine. All right. Right now in this situation, Cyrita employs Gary. Okay. That's my situation. That's my context. With your 2 names, you have a real situation. Do the same thing. Okay. Think of whatever that example is for now. Next, do it again. Choose another name. All right. For me, I'm going to choose Liam. And I'm going to make a connection between Cyrita and Liam and Gary and Liam. You know what? In this situation, Cyrita is going to house Liam. Liam is a 16-year-old in my story, my narrative. And I'm going to figure out exactly the relationship between Gary and Liam in a second. You do the same. Choose a third person and draw relationships, draw arrows between the person, each person, and how they influence each other. Keep in mind, arrows could go 2 ways. So Cyrita could employ Gary, and potentially Gary could give feedback to Cyrita on a personnel evaluation form that happens annually. So whatever the most important ones that come to make sense, if there isn't one, don't force it, but whatever influences actually make sense, draw lines between the 2. Next, do it with all the names. This is what we're working towards. What you should see, if you've done it enough, is a big old map. On my screen right now, you can see an example of what a rough map can start to look like. I think it's on the next slide. Yeah, you can see example like that. It does not have to look like that as long as all the names are available and all the relationships, all the points of influence, the arrows of influence are where they should be. If you don't know how one person influences another and you know there is a relationship, put a question mark. That question mark matters. Okay? Mark with the real questions. You should. You absolutely should. And that really will come in later down the line when we talk about where you actually sit and how to deal with that. So yes, I'm going to say this, we're going to reiterate it later. You are not the center of this map. It feels like you're the center with the work that you're building and how much focus you are on your project, but In many ways, no one is really the main, they shouldn't be considered the main center of our map because we have webs of connections that affect us in all different and unique ways. Okay? So with that said, let us take about 5 or so minutes, all right, and try to draw out as good of a map as you can with your stakeholders and their relationships. Cool? That makes sense? Copy. Beautiful. The timer's going. Take your time. Enjoy yourself. We're here if you have any questions. Please put them into the chat if you can. Can get back on your screen. We would love to see your shining faces. For the folks that can't, we understand and appreciate you. So the main focus for this next section, to reiterate, is about engaging with the type of people you're likely to encounter on your social change journey. So the way we characterize this is by first naming the type of people you're likely to engage with. And then for each one of those type of individuals, we have a tactic that we think that we have tried and we have put into our own practices as very, very valuable in activating your network. So first, let's talk about the different types of people. The next slide. How many people here have heard of or used or been frustrated at the concept of a persona before? Okay. Some folks have, some folks have not. Let me define it for folks. A working definition for here. A persona is a fictional character. It is a person, it is a narrative, it is a type of individual that you have built based on research about reality. They are based on you going out in the world and seeing different types of individuals you have been exposed to out in the world. 10, 20, 100 of these types of folks, and you see trends, you see patterns, and then you start naming that type of character based on how you want to engage them. This thing has been used in user experience. It's been used in marketing. The idea, Aparna had the example, for instance, like if there was, say, a individual that lived in the Pacific Northwest and listened to way too much Beyonce and said, I really want to figure out how to work out in the way I need to, but I don't have the resources. You go on Instagram and that persona would direct Aparna. They would see Aparna in the data that's about Aparna and direct them to, for instance, Dick's Sporting Goods ads. Like, oh, you don't like Dick's Sporting Goods? Oh no, it's been a long time since I've been there. Point is,
Beyonce lovers would never go to there.
Never. It's a bad place. It's a horrible place.
IG would encourage me to use Bala. That's right. That is what IG encourages me to use.
Then dang it, you already get the point. All right. These are people, these are mythic individuals that are created to help us build strategies about how to engage with folks that fall into that description, right? Here, for social change work, in my work, in Aparna's work, we have some personas that you've likely engaged with and that will help you think about how to engage with them in the future. Here are the first two. Patrons is the first one. Direct example, funders, funding agencies, right? These are people that can support your endeavor with their resources. The easiest one is who can fund it. What amount of resources are available or who hold the keys to make that happen, right? But they are not the only types of patrons. There might be a polymath, someone that knows how to do a lot of different things or a lot of different spaces, or a direct expert that believes in your project and just dumps information on you about how to do it appropriately. Or you might be engaged with a social butterfly, right? Someone who knows a lot of different people, who loves going to the right parties in the right place and saying, oh, I know all these different environments, but I love what you're working on. So I know the direct right people that need to be on your team to make the job work, right? These are people that believe in what you're building and might not be able to invest sweat equity to make it happen, but can invest other types of resources to do so. The second type of person is a beneficiary. There's a phrase that feels resonant, but also just personally feels like really icky, really frustrating when people bring it up. The targets. These are the people that would be targeted or affected by the thing that you're building. All right. So there are many different examples, whether it's consumers, whether it's customers, whether it's folks that you're trying to engage in your nonprofit endeavor, those types of things. These are the people usually in equity issues that are most proximate to the problem. So these are the people you need to take into account the most when you're building your minimum viable action and your strategy. The next two are critics and accomplices. Mark, let's talk about critics. Let's talk about gatekeepers, right? Let's talk about the people that in both of these situations offer tactical, intellectual, or otherwise other types of, or logistic and administrative pressure on your project's success. So there are two different big categories that we talked about. One of this, Mark, I'm glad you brought it up, was gatekeepers, people that like, I won't let this happen unless you do this, you go back, you backflip in this way, and you jump when I say how high for whatever that works. And sometimes you have to go through them, you have to do what they say, and sometimes you maybe not. And the other type are naysayers, right? The people that are around that have a lot of opinions and have a lot of gripes about its building, but don't necessarily have a lot of influence over whether or not it will make, or probably don't even want to have a lot of influence, right? But these are valuable people because they give you an opportunity to get feedback on what's working, what's not, that you can then use to build a more rigorous strategy. That's the main focus of us focusing with critics. Number 4 are accomplices. These are your comrades. These are your folks in arms. These are the people, like whether it's family, whether it's people that believe in your mission, people that are like, I believe in your leadership, let's do it, let's make it happen. The people that will work alongside and organize to take the endeavor forward. Everyone here is doing too much. Most of you are groups of one to make this happen. And to make sure that this is delegated appropriately, finding strange, for the lack of a better phrase, bedfellows, people that will help you go down the path with you and do things that you can't, are critical. So remember these 4. First one is patrons. The second is beneficiaries. The third is critics. And the fourth is accomplices. Now, some points about this I want you to remember about this, this mindset in the first place. Number 1, these personas are not perfect. You might come across a different type of person that you might run into multiple times that requires another different type of persona that you can put in your own box. But these personas are a start, because we also have resources that you can use to engage with them directly. So make sure that if you make a new persona, that you have a strategy to engage with them as well. Number 2, a person can hold many different identities at once. So a patron can also be a gatekeeper. In many ways, they likely are. They're like, you got to do it if you want to do it my way, right? But a gatekeeper, a critic, can also be an accomplice, right? Somebody that believes in what they're building, but thinks that it should be changed for these reasons because of what they've been exposed to, right? So think about these not as solid boxes, but as heuristics, as rules of thumb for how to potentially engage with other folks, right? Number 3, these identities are not solidly blocked in time. A person can turn into a critic after being an accomplice. Like you've worked with them for a certain amount of time and there's been difficult issues or relationships, what have you, and then they turn into, I didn't like them in the first place. What are we talking about? I'm not going to talk about that, those 10 decades that I worked with you, whatever the amount of time might be, right? People can turn from one persona to another, not necessarily at a drop of a hat, but they can happen based on the relationships that are built and a lot of things that we can't control. So you shouldn't think that you can always engage with a person the same singular way. And number 4 is that a person's identity can be affected. A person's persona can be affected by their identities. What does this mean? We just learned about a target and agent, right? So different agent identities, for instance, if you are a white, cis, American man, right? It's likely that when you're engaging on a particular equity issue and you want them to support, they might be a patron, right? And the communities that might be most critical of the work might hold maybe a single oppressed identity, but are looking for power in their own ways. So they might find umbrage with the work that you're trying to build, right? You're trying to build something for Black women or for queer folks or folks that are immigrants, and they say, actually, no, my issue is, you might connect certain personas with certain types of people, but it is not a one-to-one relationship. So these things are a tool, these things are a model. All models are wrong, but some models are useful. So that's what you should remember as you talk about these types of personas. And now we're going to move into practicing how to deal with these personas piece by piece. So let's start with the next slide. Patrons. This is someone, as a reminder, that can support your endeavor with their resources. Here are a few examples that might come to mind. Funders, owners of a specific center, a convention center, or a house that you're trying to move in, a social butterfly, an elder that everyone trusts. What are they offering if they're an elder? They're offering credibility to the work you're building based on a community that they are an elder over, right? A community historian, they're patronizing knowledge of the past, right? So in these situations, what do? You use Snap. This is built by a genius presenter in an organization called Mind Value about half a decade ago, called Super Networking at an Accelerated Pace. And it was marketed as a resource that's supposed to replace the elevator pitch. This is basically supposed to be an incredibly powerful elevator pitch. And this is what I'm going to do to you. I'm going to model to you these questions that are named here. To do this appropriately, in 60 to 120 seconds, you answer these questions. 1, what's your name and what do you represent? If it's an org, if it's an initiative, it's a place, what have you, whatever makes sense. Number 2, what is the result of the change you're building? This mistake. They talk about how well and how much cake that they decide to bake. They talk about the type of practices that they accomplish. They talk about what the work actually looks like, the mission, instead of the outcome, what people get out of that experience, right? That's critical and that's important to remember. The third question is, what's in it for the person you're talking to? All right? When you're connecting with an individual, why should they care? You should know that before you start talking to them. And the last one is, what questions can you ask directly to help support your endeavor? It's all about making sure the project moves forward. So you're answering these questions. What I'm actually going to do for you is I'm going to time myself giving you my snap. Okay? So you all can hear what it actually sounds like. Are we ready? Can I go? All right, here we go. Hello, everybody. My name is Dr. Pierce Okrohile Gordon, and I build practical knowledge resources for equitable social change agents across the globe. The projects that I've designed for have guided national entrepreneurship policy for Botswana. They've helped run successful mayoral campaigns in the Deep South, and they've built life-saving PPE infrastructure for local communities during COVID. Supporting my work will ensure that your colleagues and your comrades will clearly learn, collaborate, and build a future together with equity and creativity at its core. Can you help me out? Do you know anyone that needs knowledge power to transform their social change work? And if so, can you introduce them to me? "51 seconds. That's fine. So that is a snap. And that's an example of what we want you to be able to build to move your endeavor forward. So the next step is for you all to work on building your own. In the next slide, this is what we're going to do. You're going to get in groups of 2, and you're going to follow these instructions. You're going to write your snap script. You're going to prototype whatever it can look like. It is okay that it's not going to be the best. That is fine. At least as long as you can get something down first. And then with your colleagues, you're going to practice it literally as many times as you can. First, focus on writing it. Then second, focus on saying it. Okay? Are there any questions? Are there any concerns? Are there any thoughts about how to do this appropriately?
Do we have to have someone specifically in mind? It seems like that would help. Or is it more of a general?
The more specific that you can translate it to a person, the better. If you are having trouble coming up with a person, start with something, because when you have someone that you can connect it to, you can apply kind of what you've written, a bit of the copy, to their context. It is okay to do either way. All right? More to hear more about why it works and to try and make it so that it works for you. So, a start on the path. How did it feel? How did it feel to try it out for anybody?
It was really hard for me. And I think that's something that I'm recognizing in my work, is that, you know, I'm not doing a good job, or maybe I can reframe that. I can do a better job with case making and with visibilizing my work and letting my needs be known if I got into practice with, just got into the practice of doing this very exercise. But yeah, I think that is something that has stagnated my work in particular, is how folks would maybe receive it, or maybe not hearing me or not saying it the way folks would I guess hear it. And so I think this framework is something that I want to really get into practice with. But it was hard. It was hard for me.
I appreciate you naming that. I didn't really feel like I felt comfortable with it until after maybe about my 50th try. But it is really worth practicing, I promise. Any other thoughts?
Gary.
Yeah, I feel like for me, it's really hard too, because it said 60 to 120 seconds, and I'm like 60 to 120 minutes in my mind, because I love hearing myself talk. So by defining what I'm trying to say will help sell it better, and I think it's more impactful. So I do need to work on that, because when it's tight and it makes sense, everybody's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I get that, instead of just me blabbering. So yeah, love it.
The attention economy is a thing for a reason, right? Like, people have only a certain amount of attention for this work, for our time. And I appreciate that you noticed that. Tom.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard. These things are are tough. I think the biggest thing, I've done these before. The biggest thing is to do it with somebody else one-on-one and actually get the feedback. I think often we do these things and we don't do that because no one forces us to do that. And that's super, super helpful.
Yeah. Gotta find folks. Hey, wait a minute. Do we have buddies in the class? I think we do have buddies in the class for a reason. I wonder what that reason is. But also, not only the buddies, right? I annoy my wife with these things all the time. You can follow my lead if you'd like.
I thought you were going to say, and you can find a wife if you'd like.
If you want, find whoever makes sense for you or nobody. Find a squirrel. No, can't get feedback from a squirrel. Aparna, come on, why would you say that? Anyway, the point here is we all know that we have far to go, but at least we have a resource that we can work on. Next.
If you want to record, if you want to record your snap and send it to us, we'll watch it. We're happy to offer feedback on it. I feel like of the 4 things that we're gonna do today, you got to get it down. Like this is the one that like you really have to practice. And the challenge is that we don't always know how to move people that we don't have shared identities with. So if you're Gary and you're trying to move like a VP or a donor, how, like, what is a priority for them, right? Like if you're Liam and Meg and you're trying to move the founders of a fast growing series, whatever startup, what are the priorities? Where is their mind? Yeah. Okay. Let's keep on keeping on.
Let's keep on with the next topic. Beneficiaries. One of them. These are people that would be targeted or affected by your intervention. And there are a lot of different examples that exist out in the world. Here are only a few that came to mind personally. That third one really resonates with me as an international development specialist because a lot of this work deals with village leaders, the loudest and the people that love discussing power in their own spaces instead of those that are invisibilized, right? So the question then here now is, how do you engage with beneficiaries? The answer is one of my favorite resources. We're going to turn into qualitative researchers. The 5 whys and the 5 hows are ways to frame how you can ask questions and learn more about the depth of people's perspective. So they do a thing, they're engaged in a space and they're trying to deal with it. You're trying to understand more. The whys help you understand the abstract, the purpose, the reasoning, the values that someone holds as they do this type of work. And there are many different questions that can be asked. The hows are practical. They are about day-to-day, what happened, what made you think you went in that direction, how did you decide to go that route, what all of those pieces are about understanding what they have to deal with while they're trying to address this problem or live their lives. So the 5 whys and the 5 hows is critical in design thinking and UX spaces when people are trying to learn more about how to build certain projects, and you can do the same for your endeavors and to engage with people that your issues are going to affect. So let's practice it. This is how we're going to practice it this time, okay? We're going to stay together this time, and we're going to act as a stage. One brave individual in this group is going to share their topic again. We did a lot of sharing in that last talk, that last resource. What we're going to do in this space, you're going to share 2 pieces of information very quickly. The first one is the equity challenge, 1 sentence, so only a few sentences, and then the strategy you're using to address that challenge. Okay? So the equity challenge and then the strategies. Once you say that, we as a collective will ask why and how questions. And we'll answer, we'll learn more, we'll learn about the perspectives, and we'll learn about what questions are valuable when we engage with people that are in our spaces. So this starts with a brave individual that wants to say more about their work. Who wants to go?
Even if it's half baked, I think it's okay.
Oh yeah, even if it's half baked. Appreciate you, Maya. Thank you for being here in the first place.
What if it's like a quarter baked?
That's fine. Even better. Let's bake it some more.
Okay.
Thank you for this, Mark.
What was the first question again? The prompt. I had it, and then
is
I
the
was
equity
like, I'm not
challenge.
gonna.
What is the equity challenge, and what's your current rough maybe strategy to address it?
Okay, so let me just take a snip of this so I have it. Makes my life easier. Okay, so my current, so the challenge that we are dealing with, I am the DEI specialist for Premier Blue Cross. So this is an organization of 3,500 plus people. We have 2 DEI staff. And I'm within employee experience. So my role is to help employees. However, we have a huge number of employees who are within our operations realm. So like customer service representatives who do not have access to the work that we're doing. They show up to work, they get on the phones, they take phone calls from the time they start in the morning to the end of their shift. So we have these DEI programs that are not accessible to everyone in the organization. So that's, I think, my issue. Oh yeah, and then also, the issues of the way that the structure of the organization is. I don't really have access to very many decision makers. However, I have built I've been building a relationship with one of our VPs who just randomly became part of one of our work groups. He happens to be the VP over operations and is involved in a work group, so personally is seeing the importance of this work. So I guess the strategy that I'm thinking is like how to bring him along and get his buy-in for his employees.
Heard. Glad that opportunity opened up for you. What the crowd, I'm talking to everyone else now. It's time for why questions. Let's try and think of why questions that we can ask Mark collectively.
My question, I guess, would be why don't you have access to a bunch of decision makers?
Yeah. Mark, go ahead. You can answer.
Do I answer these? Okay.
Yes, you do.
Well, we have a very strange structure in DEI, and I report to the senior manager of DEI, who I have like unending access to, and then he reports to one of our executive vice presidents, who is, I can't just send her an email. It would be filtered through There is someone who's, I'd say, in kind of a gatekeeping role where everything goes through that person before it goes through, yeah.
I see some answers being, some questions being noted in the chat. Mark, how about answering one of Natalie's questions?
Okay, yeah, so why is it important for customer service reps to access DEI resources? I mean, I feel like they're these, if we're gonna talk about how we are a company that wants to be an anti-racist company and a company that embraces diversity, equity, inclusion, but our frontline staff don't even have access to the work that we're doing, it feels hypocritical. And you know, just from stories that I've gathered, we know that this work helps people feel like they belong. We just did a big fair last week, and people are like, you know, I've been here for 20 years and I've never seen anything like this before. This is the first time that I've been able to engage with employees who look like me and things like that. So,
yeah. We have, Mark, you have multiple different questions in the chat as well, other ones. How about you choose one more in the why category that you want to answer?
okay. I think I'm going to go with Veronica's question of why the gatekeeper is not supportive of DEI. I don't think that it's that she's not supportive of DEI. I think that she is very much a devil's advocate, as if the devil needed more advocates. Very much like, but what about white people? But what about I don't know that she sees herself in the work that we're doing. And I think that that's probably true for a lot. I say that's probably true for a lot of people. They don't, if people think that DEI is only for Hispanic people or only for Black people or only for queer people, and if they don't see where they fit,
yeah,
then maybe they don't see the value.
Right. That's a hard question to work with and work through. And in this hard time, I'm going to switch what we're going to talk about this time. My friends, I appreciate all the questions that you've asked. Can we use some of that expertise, some of that genius for the how questions? I appreciate you all putting it into the chat. If it feels more comfortable to put a how question to ask Mark in the chat, please do. And we will answer them as they come up. We're going to try our best to answer 3 questions so you all know what to expect here. Lindsay, I believe you're raising your hand. If you'd like to, you can speak if you would like to.
Hey, Mark, we've talked about this a bit in the breakout session, but one question I would ask is how would support be demonstrated by the different roles, including the VP that you're looking to approach?
Great question, Lindsay. How would support be demonstrated? I mean, like if I could have everything that I wanted, then the customer service reps would be, allotted time to participate in programs, which would, have to come from his budget and resources.
Yeah. Heard, appreciate that. I see some other how questions in the chat as well.
How I'll build relationships with the VP to achieve my goals. Yeah, I've been really inviting him in to not just, so he's joined the, we have various work groups. He's joined the Native American work group, and inviting him into the other work that we're doing. And, kind of, you got to do the whole, like, here's your cookie for coming to this thing. Just thank you. I mean, I'm happy that he's there. And I'm actually going to be interviewing him for a DEI program that we're doing in November. So kind of giving him a bit of a platform to share his experiences, which I then hope to, use for my purposes as well. But with him, yeah, I've kind of bypassed the, going to the administrative assistant, and I just go right to him, and don't know how I got to do that, but it's working. So
yeah. I'm going to step in here just for a couple of minutes, also keeping track of time. You might remember that some of the skills that we talked about in previous sessions is honesty. And we need to be really honest about what's happening in our context. I'm actually very familiar with Mark's context. And no, right? Like, your gatekeeper does not care about DEI. And so I'm not going to make you say anything out loud because I know you're in the office. Right. But in what way will you be able to create a right-sized challenge if you could actually say this person does not care, right? Like, they're actually hostile. Not only do they not care, they're actually hostile. Right? The organization does not care about anti-racism. It's not profitable to be an anti-racist healthcare organization. It is not, right? If customer service was trained, they might push through all of our claims faster. That makes everything less profitable. So what does it mean to be honest in even naming the dynamics with stakeholders so that we can right-size our problem and we can right-size the solution? And that's not just for Mark, it's for everybody, because so long as we keep saying something is important or people care, but they really don't, it's like replicating the challenge that we had with Trump, where people were like, oh, like, he's just saying it, right? No, he really means it. Like, he's demonstrating in his actions, like, what's happening, and we can't not believe, right? Like, we have to be honest. So.
well, and I think, another barrier, Aparna, is that, like, it's entirely possible that you know more about my challenge than I do, because of the access that my supervisor has that I do not have. So that makes it tricky as well.
Okay, I'm happy to talk offline with anybody. Just know that very spacious existence in this moment. I want to make sure that we get through the two other personas. The critic, because we're now very much talking about the critic, and the accomplices.
Yes. So the critics, obviously, a point of discussion here in this context, the folks that offer pressure on your project in many different ways, right? And there are many different types. Two that we have been talking about consistently are one, the gatekeeper, and two, the naysayers. Different folks that come across that have a certain amount of, some have more power over whether or not our thing can build, can evolve, can sustain. But what's important about each one of these is that they are opportunities to figure out how to battle test your strategy. Because certain critics, if they don't go through the critics appropriately, they might need to, you might need to adapt, you might need to evolve, you might need to pivot what you're building in interesting and unique ways. So the question becomes, how do you take what they're saying, what they believe, into practically applying to your project? So here's the resource. Design feedback. This is from my field of specialty. One of the main themes, one of the main topics in these is there's a core difference between what people say, what people think, and what people do. And most people think those are all the exact same things. So it is your job to make sure that what you're creating actually aligns with what people will do as they're doing their work. So you need to be very judicious about how you use the feedback a critic is offering, right? This is a mindset to help you figure out how to do this appropriately. So you can start by asking yourself these four main questions. When you're engaging with a critic, one, who is this to the project? How are they related? How do they hold power over it? How do they engage with it in interesting, unique, or difficult ways? Or sometimes not at all. Number two, what exactly do you want to learn from them? Do they have an expertise in a specific thing that they're talking to you about, or are they just blowing smoke, right? Or for instance, if they're a customer and their value, their importance is interesting, even though they don't have critique over it, they don't have an expertise in the thing you're selling them. Number three, why do they care about the gripe they're holding? This is about you trying to get behind why they're giving you this feedback. What is the incentive here? We actually just did this in the conversation that we had with Mark. Is there a feeling or a concern or an insecurity or a defense they're holding about the work that they're building? Do they actually want to see it succeed? Or are they do they feel threatened by it for whatever reason, right? Last one, how should their feedback change what you're building? It does not have to all the time. Sometimes you can say, thank you, move on, and keep building what you're building. But other times, what they give is practical and valuable. You have to figure out, based on that, the people that you're talking to and what you're building, whether or not there's something that should be changed based on the thing. So that's a critical topic as well, Megan, this idea of recognizing how we have potentially been the critic. We're going to talk about that a little bit later as well. So the best way to practice this, the best way is to try this ourselves. What we're going to do is we're going to get back into groups of two, and one person is going to present their minimum viable action that you've been working on. Whatever state it's in, it is okay if it's not in the best state, okay? The other person is going to critique it. They're going to give their feedback. They're going to give thoughts. They might give things that don't make sense. They might give some things that do make sense. And your job is to get ideas out of their critique. Okay? You can change, they could change however they want to say it. You can take whatever persona you want as you're trying to do this. You can be mean, you can be bad cop, you can be good cop, whatever makes sense. But the important thing is to try and get some feedback and to practice what it feels like to deliver and distance yourself from your intervention, from the thing that you're building. Because it's not your ego. You're trying to do this to say, what can I learn? Okay? Are there any questions about what we're doing right now?
Just a quick show of hands. Do you have your MVA? Do you have an MVA? Just give me a thumbs up. All right. See a couple folks. Okay. Some of you don't have your MBA. I would encourage you to not ramble and swirl. We're going to open the breakouts for 5 minutes. Okay. I know, Gary, I see your face. Very, very tough. Don't ramble. Get really clear. Okay. So that the other person can offer you feedback. All right. Here we go.
We'll see y'all soon. We all right? Who, raise your hand for me real quick. Who was the mean person, if any, at all? Okay. Any good cops? Any people that were trying to help or support? All bad cops? Yikes. I want to reiterate.
Veronica was a good cop.
I was a good cop, right, Tom? Was I wasn't mean, right?
No, I would say you were constructive.
Listen, it's important to remember in this that you don't have to take everybody's advice.
That's
right? You don't have to explain everything around. This is all about taking what fits, taking the diamonds of the information. Okay? Let's move to the final one. Recognizing the amount of time that we have. Let's talk about accomplices. Because of the time that we have, this is considered homework if it's considered important for what you're trying to build. But if you have accomplices that you're trying to work with, this is a very powerful engagement skill set. So, very much so. On the next slide, you're going to see something called the 4 C's. Connect, context, commitment, and catapult. I was first introduced to this work by political organizers, people that every day the main activity they try to focus on is this is the person we're trying to get in office. The other person is ridiculous. Can you commit to knocking doors, right? And this is made to systematize delegation. You need people on your team to make this work. So how do you easily and quickly give them a role to play? And it's these 4 steps. Here are the first 2 steps on the next slide. Connect and context. The connection is who are you and why you care about this work. You can also let the person know how they've been affected, why they should care about it in the first place. Context is the specific action. Why now? Why the issue? What the challenges and opportunities are, basically everything that they need to know. That's important, the need to know. You're not trying to drown them in information, right? In this environment, okay? The next 2 are the important pieces. Once you've given them the context, here's what we're dealing with, here's what we're struggling with. Can you commit to this? Can you knock doors? Can you send this email to your email listserv? Can you give me $5 million? Can you give me X, Y, Z? And then you listen. You listen for unadulterated, consensual yes. Absolutely, definitely. I'm on your path, and you see if they're on your side, or anything else that, I'm not sure, or we'll push it back, or maybe Q3 or Q4, or no, I'm sorry, what have you. If they're on your side, if they say yes, you go to catapult. You give them the respect by saying, I need you to do this, and you give them responsibility for that action. And then you are now managing another person. So, to be clear, again, the 4 are connect, context, commitment, and catapult. So, is there an accountability framework? Funny you should ask, because that's going to be available in the workbook. we have a resource available afterwards. I think it's 7 to 8 different steps of you get somebody in the space. Here's how you think about managing them once you have people on your side. All right. This is project management. We all know that that is a very difficult task, but it's essential to have other people on your side to keep you all accountable to where you're going. And we have a resource for you that's going to be in the workbook. Okay. So as you do it, you all made the list. If you've done your homework, you've made a list of the people that are in your space. Here's the thing. Every single one of those people might fall into any one of these personas. So you can search out people that are potential accomplices, find an individual, and write them a script. And once you've written one script, you might be able to write others based on that past script you just wrote. It's very valuable. And you should also keep in mind on this next slide where you sit in this space. Are you a patron? Are you an accomplice to someone else's work? All right. Are you critiquing in spaces where you shouldn't? And where are you in the map that you just created? How are you related to other people? And how do you hold power, and how do people hold power over you? This is essential because you are not the center of any one of this work's universe. You are a connection of one, but doing this helps you clarify where you can actually sit and what you can actually accomplish. It is essential. And I implore you, of all the things that you've done, when you build all these spaces, think about where I sit in this so that you don't think that you should be at the center. So, last little sections, 3 minutes to get through it. Let's talk about skills. Okay? There are 3 core skills that we want to discuss here. The first one, seeing connections. All of this, zooming out, engaging with other people, is about seeing the things that other people don't try to understand or recognize. What we do affects others past our view of influence. So we can expand our view, talk to others, connect with people that we wouldn't normally connect with, so that we can figure out how our work resonates in the ways we want to. The second one is community agility. Essentially, it means treat different people differently. You're not going to engage a critic the same way you're going to engage a funder. If one person's a pure critic, one person is a patron, don't engage them like a patron if they are a critic, all right? You don't try and ask them for information if they're already sold on not believing you, not helping you, not supporting you, right? And recognizing what you use where is essential as you do your work. The last one, to be clear, is sacrifice. We're all in our own world right now. We're all focusing on our different issues, our MVAs. Some of us are much further than others, and that is okay. You have to take the path that makes sense for you. But as you call on people, you build relationships with them if you sacrifice for them. It's not only about being nice and appreciate. That's a part of it. That's a piece of it. Be kind and all those things for the people that matter, that be a good person, what have you. But if you're trying to build relationships with people that are trying to make something happen, you can show that you commit to them by sacrificing for them in the same way that they would sacrifice for you. And if they take advantage of you, this is not someone that you want on your team. So keep in mind those 3: seeing connections, community agility, and sacrifice. And let's end with some breaths and some homework. Aparna, for you.
Well, let's just take a couple of deep breaths in. We covered a lot, just relax your shoulders, and let's just take 3 deep breaths in together. Okay, so next week, we're heading into a really deep, possibly hard session. The homework is keep moving your work along and share it with other people. I know that some of you are still not chatting about what you're building, and I'm going to encourage you to do it. If your buddy is unavailable, right, or they have ghosted you, then you can reach out. Hey, look, it happens. You can reach out to us. We're happy to connect with you. Find people in your context to share with. Okay, at least 2 people. Work on your stakeholder maps, get really clear on the personas. Maybe it's the 4 that we covered today. Maybe there's a 5th one. Get really clear on your accomplices and critics. Really, really clear. If it doesn't move and sound and smell like an accomplice, it's not an accomplice, and you can't rely on them to back you, right? Okay. And there is a really short document. We want you to read it before the next session. It is going to go out in tomorrow's email. We can also pop a link in the chat for you now so that you have it. It's a framework. And for those of you that have more time, more spaciousness, the source document that it comes from, like the academic paper that it comes from, is linked in it. You can read it if you want. At a minimum, please read this 1 page ahead of the next session. And that's it. There's a lot of work that I think if you want to move along, you have the option to move along between this and next week. Reach out, send us recordings, connect with us, and drink water, eat food, take walks, take care of yourself. There's a lot of heaviness in the world, and so that's it.
We appreciate you